it comes as no surprise. I think someone already has commented about the fact that Democrats stood up and applauded quite a bit. I think we even had a few enthusiastic members who, there was a little hooting and hollering going on, actually, over some of the things that we heard, especially when we heard pro-family policies, pro-child, families with children, when the governor talked about the things to do for the children in this state. The Democrats were right there because many of the policies that he talked about are things that we do champion, have championed in the past, and join him in supporting for our families going forward. But at the same time, we also did not hear some things. We did not hear certainly the discussion, the acknowledgement of the fact that many Ohioans are in crisis. They're facing a child care crisis, a housing crisis, of cost of living crisis. Every day, our offices are receiving calls from folks who are struggling with the high cost of quality child care, which means parents are buying fewer groceries, delaying paying utility bills sometimes, and medical bills, and struggling to keep a roof over their head. Rising property values are forcing seniors out of their homes. So we have threats and outrageous authoritarian abuses of power coming from the federal government. We don't live in a bubble here in Ohio, that have incited panic and uncertainty for many of the vital services and federal funding that Ohio and our state and our local governments count on. We rely on those funds. We can and we must do better. So continued advocacy to keep the promise through the CHIPS Act is included in that. Now, the governor did speak about that today. He talked about the project, what it means in terms of jobs, but we also wanted to hear and want to hear the governor and the advocacy that he is doing on the behalf of Ohio and that project and all the funds that'll come through the CHIPS Act. We hope that he is advocating for us to the federal government to keep those funds available and coming to the state of Ohio. Not only does it mean jobs, it's a cause of our national security. While Ohioans are struggling, our state government has shown time and time again that they're out of touch with what Ohioans care about. A February poll from Bowling Green found that just 17% of Ohio voters trust the Ohio legislature. That makes me sad. But I understand it, sadly, as well. A recent poll from Baldwin Wallace found that inflation, the economy, were identified as the most pressing issues for Ohioans, yet the Republican majority has failed to take any action to lower costs or improve our economy. As Senator Blacksher said in his floor speech on Senate Bill 1, often referred to as the Higher Education Destruction Act by many of the opponents of that bill, the real DEI in the Republican-led legislature is how we're doing everything instead of what the people want. An example of that is instead of taking any meaningful action to invest in our kids or lower property taxes, the legislature, through Senate Bill 1, has prioritized an egregious attack and planned to dismantle our world-renowned institutions of higher learning. Then they ignored the will of Ohioans by overhauling the marijuana law approved by a majority of voters. There's a lot that we and the governor, as I said, agree on. We absolutely should be focusing on our kids, our economy, our workforce, higher education institutions in a positive way. But we have much work on how we do that. If we truly want Ohio, as he said, building Ohio's future, if we're going to be building Ohio's future together, then it's the how we do it that probably we don't quite agree on. But as the legislature continues to work on our state budget, we hope to build on some of the historic investments the governor has proposed and pass a budget that truly expresses Ohio's values and works for every Ohioan and provides relief as well to those in need. Ohio Democrats continue to be staunch advocates for all Ohioans, fighting for a state that embraces freedom, opportunity, and dignity. We continue to work toward an Ohio and a budget that protects, houses, educates, supports, and empowers workers and all families, because all families in Ohio should count and do count and contribute to the bottom line of Ohio's future. One of the best ways we can support working families is to lower costs. Now, the governor proposed the child tax credit of $1,000 per child through age 6. You saw all the Democrats stood up and cheered because we know that getting those funds into our local communities makes all the difference in the world for the families as well as our communities. We were also pleased to see him continue to support the publicly funded child care available, but I gotta say, at a 200% level of the federal poverty level. That's about $64,000 for a family of 4. That's great. That's what we have right now. What we really like to see is that bottom line increased. I would like to see it increased to at least 300%. And I have to say that if we can afford, which we can't, but if we could, my colleagues across the aisle say we can afford vouchers for schools, for private schools, a family of 4 that makes over $140,000, we should be able to raise the threshold for child care vouchers subsidies to a higher level. I mean, it just makes sense. Maybe too much sense, but it does make sense. 1 in 5 Ohio children are also food insecure, and our food banks are experiencing record high demand. You didn't hear the governor talk about food insecurity because his budget actually cuts the food bank funding by 23%.
That's right.
That doesn't make any sense. We know that to set our children and families up for success, we should increasing the funding for school food banks or passing bipartisan legislation. Senator Smith has Senate Bill 109, which provides free, healthy breakfasts and lunches for schools. We should be doing that. The Ohio Constitution requires the legislature to fund a thorough and efficient public education system that serves the public good. Every child should be able to attend a good school, regardless of their zip code, their religious affiliation, or no affiliation for that matter, or their ability, which is why we should focus on funding public schools adequately and equitably. But the budget proposed before us actually cuts $103 million from public schools that 90% of our Ohio students attend, including $90 million in cuts for special education. I hope you all got that. We heard the governor talk about how, and I agree with him, how wonderful, we should make opportunity for job readiness and for jobs for people who have different abilities. Our young people, as they rise in age to work level age, unfortunately, we're cutting their education. That makes no sense. Resources for their education. In order for them to truly have the opportunity in the future, we have to provide all the funding needed for special education students. And I'll just remind you that those vouchers, when we increase public funding of vouchers for unaccountable and exclusionary private charter and religious-based schools to the tune of $2.4 billion, these schools can arbitrarily choose their students and deny certain students without consequence, including those with special needs. And you know, we heard, I heard the Speaker and the President of the Senate both say that, you know, transparency and accountability is so important. I couldn't agree more. That transparency and accountability needs to be with every single dollar that goes towards any education of any child in Ohio. And right now, there is not the same measure for public schools and private schools. We need to change that. I would love to see leadership from my colleagues across the aisle on that issue as well. For decades, Senator Ingram has been a staunch advocate for our public schools. I applaud her leadership in this role, because if we truly want to invest in our children, we should fully fund the Fair School Funding Plan. We can't, but it must be noted, we can't accurately calculate the cost of educating every child in 2025 by using 2022 data, which is what's being done right now under the current proposal. Property taxes are the building blocks of school funding, but the proposed budget actually creates an over-reliance on local tax levies to fund schools, exacerbating our property tax crisis, underfunding schools and communities that can't afford or pass levies. And as we heard from our colleagues, they're saying, because the governor did not address this issue, what we know is that everyone realizes in the legislature this is an issue. We have to put our heads together and figure out an equitable solution. So far, we don't have it. But we have some suggested possibilities and proposals. Senator Craig has been a leader championing in the legislature those who need it most: property tax circuit breaker, expanding the homestead exemption, and a property tax freeze for seniors on fixed incomes. These kinds of pieces of legislation could really make a difference as we're addressing property taxes. When we talk about proposing a flattened income tax, which is what our colleagues have proposed, we can't continue the decades-long pattern of tax cuts for the wealthy at the expense of our public schools and critical government services. Ohioans paying more at the checkout counter. Then I'm thankful for Senator Hicks Hudson's work as the ranking member on finance. One of the things that we know is any kind of flattening of taxes and increasing of sales tax disproportionately affects low-income people. It is not the solution for the vast number of working and middle-class Ohioans. Local governments pay for essential services. They protect our children and seniors, support public safety, courts, public health, public transit, parks, libraries. But for too long, we've been nickeling and diming our local governments. We must ensure our local governments and libraries are adequately funded. We didn't hear the governor talk about H2 Ohio, but I just want to say that I think it's a little ironic that there is funding in the budget for it, but at the same time, I and many of my colleagues are very concerned about the fact that, and there's also drilling and fracking going on underneath our public parks right now. We believe that should absolutely be stopped. I've introduced Senate Bill 132 to press pause on drilling in our parks. Because it's just a health hazard. We've seen the fires and some of the disastrous results of that so far. We also need to protect health, safety, and well-being of Ohioans. Senator DeMora and Senator Hicks Hudson introduced the Ohio Health Care Plan to provide universal access to life-saving care for all Ohioans. We applaud the governor. He mentioned the National Suicide and Crisis Line 988, and mental health, increasing mental health services across the board. People are complete systems of health with mental health and their physical health all being a part of the system. And you can't address those issues and piecemeal out the support for certain populations, winners and losers. But at the same time, what we didn't hear any discussion of is the fact that the current budget 700,000 Ohioans are at risk of losing health care if congressional Republicans reduce federal funding for Medicaid expansion. Ohio can't afford to go back to a time when low-income folks only receive health care in emergency rooms. Ohio needs to be the leader in public health. We count on Senator Dr. Liston for her dedication in ensuring all Ohioans have access to affordable health through the work that she's doing. Healthcare has to be a human right, not a privilege. It's not a commodity. As the richest country on earth, there should be no reason why we can't provide basic health care for all Ohioans. And while I appreciate some of those small projects and ideas, glasses for kids, wonderful. We passed a bill last time, hearing aids for kids. But we're piecemealing this out instead of really having a unified system. And as Governor DeWine attempts to cement his legacy in the final cycle, budget cycle, We hope he'll join us and continue to advocate for workers and families across the great state, including supporting and holding the businesses in our state accountable to the promises that they have made to Ohioans, not raising taxes, not balancing the budget on the backs of Ohioans, especially those from the middle class and low-income folks. And with that, I will turn it over to Leader Russo.
Thank you, Leader Antonio. Today, we certainly heard the views of the governor's views on the state of the state and the direction that he wants to see Ohio go. I agree with many of the sentiments that he expressed today, and we share his hope that Ohio will be a place to start a family, to build a career, and retire with security. The future of Ohio is dependent on the decisions that are made by Ohio's lawmakers while crafting this biennial budget, which we are in the process of doing. But before we talk about Ohio's future, we must address the federal government's role in shaping that future as well. The preamble of the U.S. Constitution lays out the basic principles of the federal government. In order to form a more perfect union, it must, quote, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. Justice, tranquility, defense, welfare, liberty. Our federal government is not living up to those principles, and the domino effect of that failure is being felt right here in Ohio. Federal programs that provide critical services that many Ohioans rely on are under attack. And these are programs for children and the elderly, veterans, Medicaid, special education support for our students, school meals, housing, SNAP and food assistance, and nonprofit work. Laws passed by Congress, like the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, many of the jobs that the governor lauded in his opening statements are because of those pieces of legislation. Right now, those initiatives ensure that the technology of tomorrow is being built right here today in Ohio, and they guarantee those jobs, new investments, and new opportunities to grow our economy. Those things could be dismantled, and they are under attack. It is not lost on me that many of my colleagues across the aisle stood up and applauded when we talked about those jobs and Intel, but none of them are speaking out right now as the president attacks many of those programs. These cuts don't just slash numbers on a balance sheet. They are real, tangible cuts to working families, to our veterans, to our seniors, and children across our state. Unpredictable tariffs have lit the fuse for a potential trade war that will have real consequences for millions of Ohioans. Working families, farmers, people working towards retirement are hurting right now, and they're seeing prices go up every day on those everyday items, while their investments and retirement funds are seeing drastic losses. These political choices do absolutely nothing to cut the cost of living for everyday Ohioans. In fact, they are likely to increase it. And we, as government leaders here in the State House, we owe it to the people to address the issues that they care about. That's it. No excuses, no finger pointing, just focus on solutions. And that's why we must be putting people over politics right now, more than ever, at every single level of government, whether we're in Washington, D.C., or right here in Columbus, or every city, town, and village in Ohio that we represent. Because putting people first means that your government recognizes that you deserve better than just getting by. Ohioans deserve a better paycheck that fully supports their family, not one that leaves them scrambling to make ends meet. Ohioans deserve affordable health care that doesn't force them to choose between getting the medicines that they need or paying their bills. And Ohioans deserve guarantees that their schools, their offices, and communities are safe from those intending to do us harm. The governor's State of the State address and his state operating budget that he has proposed is certainly a start in the right direction. In a state where 18% of our children live in poverty, his support of the child tax credit would help families with young children. The governor's proposals support access to quality child care with assistance for urban, suburban, and rural families during a time where 5 in 10 Ohio parents say that they have had to cut back from work hours because they need to care for their children. We can do better, and Ohioans deserve better. The governor's proposals support critical health and human services funding that is necessary for our communities and our elderly, and that supports mental health treatments. Common sense and compassionate policymaking can be one of the governor's lasting legacies, but to accomplish this, he needs both Democrats and Republicans working together. We can be both fiscally responsible while also being morally compassionate. But for all the good that this budget does, there is still so much more work that can be done. Nothing in the governor's proposed budget addresses the fact that prices are still too high at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, and for Ohioans who are struggling to afford quality housing and higher education. Ask any elected official here in Ohio, and they will tell you that a major issue that they hear about is skyrocketing property taxes. They'll tell you about the senior citizens worried about whether they can age in their own homes, and the families worried about whether they can afford to remain in their own communities. But the governor's current proposed budget does nothing about that. Here at the State House, we have bipartisan solutions to address property taxes in both chambers that we could enact today. It is a choice that they have not been enacted, and Ohioans deserve better. And if we want an Ohio that supports our seniors and our workforce needs, we have to start now with our youngest Ohioans. We have to fully invest in our children and in the strength of our public schools, where nearly 90% of Ohio's children attend school. But in the governor's proposed budget, public schools stand to lose more than $100 million and $80 million, and 87% of our public schools are facing a reduction in his proposed budget at a time where inflation and costs are skyrocketing. Without this critical funding, schools will be forced to ask taxpayers to pay more in local taxes or be forced to cut critical services to students. I also noted that the governor went on and on about wanting more kids to participate in sports and extracurricular activities. Well, let me tell you, the way to do that is to fully fund our schools so those kids don't have to pay the fees. This plan is insufficient if we want to build a well-educated and prepared citizenry and future workforce. At the same time, the governor's plan, while we're cutting funding for 87% of our public schools, the governor's plan would hand out almost $2.4 billion in vouchers to private and charter schools. Ohioans deserve better. Our children and our public schools deserve better. Ohioans deserve a budget that lowers their day-to-day cost, not one that gives more state money away to the wealthiest Ohioans. Over 15 years of Republican leadership has resulted in a state that increases taxes on the majority of middle-class Ohioans. We have not, while we've cut the income tax and it's the lowest that it has been in 50 years, we've simply shifted those taxes to Ohioans in other ways. And we've done that in favor of cutting taxes for the richest, cutting checks to the wealthiest Ohioans for their private education and their business deals, giving tax exemptions for private jets, and also a $1 billion corruption scandal where the costs are passed off to everyday Ohioans on their utility bills. This is unsustainable long-term, and it has weakened our state budget's foundation. That's why Ohio House Democrats and our Ohio House senators are fighting for a budget that benefits our children, our families, our seniors, and our economy, because Ohioans deserve better. When we put people first, we are putting Ohioans at the center of every single decision that we make here. We are focusing on the issues that matter most: better pay, better health care, fairer taxes, safer communities, affordable housing, real opportunities, and a secure economic future. It is time for us as lawmakers to put forward a budget that builds opportunities for everyday Ohioans and sets us on a path for economic prosperity that is felt by all Ohioans, because Ohioans deserve better.